Hi everybody, welcome back to True Crime After Dark. So I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. It is Tuesday and this is my video for today. I have been looking for this video for so long and it is by Dark Crime Stories. I finally found it and to me, in my opinion, it shows Nichol walking out of Chris Watts' garage that morning of the murders at 5:18 a.m. So to me, busted. That's all I could say. But also there's a lot of other good information, so watch to the end because it does talk about a lot of other contradictions with Nichol, and I don't see how, if any law enforcement officer saw this video, they would not ask more questions. The corruption in this case is so unbelievable. So before we get into it, leave a like and definitely subscribe if you like the content, because we're going to be doing a lot more and all things true crime, and I'm going to get to the bottom of this one way or the other. So let's get into the video.
His vain attempts at secrecy would unravel under the weight of Shannon's family and friends, who from the very beginning would not relent. They were determined to hold Chris Watts accountable for the truly monstrous acts that he had already committed. But it's in this retrospective that we remember and affirm that no victim deserves the crimes perpetrated against them, and no amount of influence takes away from the responsibility that Chris Watt bears now and always. So with that said, let's begin just after 5:18 a.m. On August 13, 2018, we see the lights from Chris Watt's truck turning on. Moments later, we see this person walking towards Chris's work truck, and in future installments, we will return back to this moment in time. Less than 1 minute.
There it is. Now you tell me that's Chris. No, it is not. So, and it looks like a woman. They're in white shoes, not work boots. So who is walking out of Chris Watts' house at 5:18 in the morning? Who is that? I think I have my opinions, but you guys let me know what you think about that in the comments.
Later, Chris's work truck is parked in the Watts family driveway. We now know through law enforcement's body cam footage and their discussion with Chris's neighbor Nate that this was the first time that Chris had ever parked his work truck directly in front of his garage. It quickly became evident to law enforcement that Chris clearly intended to obscure anyone from seeing what he was loading into the back of his work truck that morning over the next 18 minutes. Chris can be seen loading and unloading various items into the back of his truck, including tragically his own family. And just after 5:45, Chris Watts leaves his driveway en route to Survey 319 with both of his children still alive in the back seat. It's now 6:16 a.m., and Nichol Kessinger makes a call to her close friend Jim. 3 days later, during Nichole's first in-office interview, Detective Kobach would ask her if she was willing to verify her whereabouts for the afternoon of the 13th of August. Nichol would acknowledge that upon arriving home that day, her friend Jim was already present at her apartment, which meant that he could confirm her arrival. However, when pressed to confirm her alibi, this is how Nichol Kessinger responded. From an investigative point, he could be a person who could say, "Yeah, I was there at 3:45. He doesn't know Chris. He doesn't know anything." He could say with one phone call, "Yeah, she came in at 3:45 done totally. Do you know what I'm saying? And I don't have to ask anything more than, 'Hi, Chris. My name's Kevin. I'm her Jim. And I'm not saying you have to give it leave alone. If at some point I needed Jim's info to, let's say, we couldn't find your phone records, would you tell me I will give them to you? Would you tell me who Jim was if I could? You had to. I don't really want to involve him in this, so it's not fair to him. That's not. No, if I do not have to do that, that's fine." Nichole's friend Jim is just one of many rabbit holes throughout the vastness of Watts Island. But during one of Nichole's final interviews with Detective Kobach, he mentioned that she had pictures on her phone of a heavier set man who was with her at the same time she and Chris were at the sand dunes. Nichol then confirms that the picture was of her friend Jim, and this confirmation would mean that Chris knew exactly who Jim was. And it's Jim who Nichol called in the minutes just after Chris left his house to go to Survey 319 that morning. On its face, Nichole's call to Jim doesn't appear to be out of place. She frequently called him in the days and weeks prior. However, it's Nichole's location when she made that call that has caught the attention of everyone who has ever evaluated her phone records. She frequently called him in the days and weeks prior. However, it's Nicole's location when she made that call that has caught the attention of everyone who has ever evaluated her phone records. But there's something about this entry that even law enforcement overlooked in the months of Nicole's prior phone records. We are able to ascertain her exact route to and from work. Thanks to these records, we can observe the roads that Nichol Kessinger used on her daily commute from her home to her job at Anadarko, and back each and every day. The consistency of her route is the most important part of these records. And this is why. Because on the morning of August 13th, 2018, at 6:16 a.m., for the first time in the history of Nichol Kessinger's supposed drive to work, her phone is now pinging somewhere that she has never previously been, and the tower that her phone is pinging from would place her in the same proximity of the Watts family home, the exact same address to the house that Nichol Kessinger Googled.
Exactly. So I've been looking for this video for so long, and I finally found it. I wanted to share this with you guys. Some of you may have already seen it, but this lays it out perfectly. So
less than 36 hours earlier, the journey to the oil well site was a little over an hour away from the Watts residence. But while Chris was headed there, he would begin calling and texting his coworkers just after 6:30 a.m. Watts initially tried calling Cody Roberts 3 different times before finally sending him a text asking him, "Where are you at?" 1 minute later. At 6:32, Roberts responded, "Just got fuel in Curie." It's very likely that Chris panicked when he received this message, because he knew that Curie was approximately 30 minutes away from Survey 319, and Chris was still 15 minutes away from the job site. If Cody made the decision to go and help Chris unannounced that morning, it would have completely upended his plan. Moments later, Chris attempts to call Cody, who again did not answer his phone 1 minute later at 6:33.
So that would have given him only 15 minutes. And that's assuming he arrived at work right then. That would have given 15 minutes to dump Shanann and to get the girls into the oil tanks. How is that possible? It's not. He had to have had help.
Chris sends a preemptive lie to Cody. "Okay, I'm already at Survey 319, but not wanting to leave anything to chance." Chris sends a second message to Cody. "Where are you going first thing this morning?" Robert's response, DPC state. Chris replies in sickening relief with a thumbs up emoji. But just when he thinks he's in the clear 2 minutes later, Roberts texts Chris again, informing him that one of their co-workers, Chad McNeil, was also planning on going out to Survey 319 that morning to work on the well site, while immediately asks Cody to confirm with him if he should be expecting Chad to show up that morning. Cody replies to Chris, "I think Chad might be heading out there today." His phone was breaking up pretty bad, though. Moments after receiving that message, Chris now begins to try and call Chad McNeil, who he now knows could likely show up to what will soon be the epicenter of a massive crime scene. Chris knows that he cannot arrive to the work site with his entire Iyer family in the truck, especially if his coworkers show up while he's trying to hide the monstrosity of his crimes. So as he speeds down the highway, Chris picks up his phone and tries to get Chad to answer. But again, no response 2 minutes later, and it's now 6:41 a.m. Chris is now just minutes away from Survey 319. He opens up iMessage and sends a quick text to Chad asking him, "You headed out to Survey 319. I'm already out here." Cody said something about pumping up the 1029 just after 6:43 a.m., and Chad McNeil finally responds. He takes Chris up on his offer and tells him to have Cody Roberts bring the cables that they need to do the job he acknowledges. And just 9 minutes later, Chris Watts arrives at Survey 319. To those who are familiar with everything that transpired over the course of the next 30 minutes to an hour, all we know with certainty is that whatever remained of the man that Chris Watts was prior to the events of this day, that man no longer existed, and no one will ever be able to help me to understand how anyone is capable of what Chris Watts himself has admitted to doing just after he arrived at Survey 319 the morning of August 13th, 2018. But this was just the beginning of Chris's cowardice that day, because at 7:40 a.m., Chris sent Shanann a spoof text that was a calculated measure meant to establish his future alibi for Shanann. And the girl's whereabouts, it was a cruelty intended only as a means to temporarily fool Shanann's friends and her family In the message, he said, "If you take the kids somewhere, please let me know where they are at." And he sent those words while standing mere feet away from them. Moments later, Chris called Troy McCoy and then began sending various messages to his coworkers that he knew were planning on showing up to the crime scene that he had just created. But at 7:43, Chris Watts took a picture that many now believe establishes that Nichol Kessinger knew far more than she would eventually claim to law enforcement over the. Next hour, Chris's co-workers would begin to show up to the worksite completely clueless to what Chris had just done. No one noticed anything particularly strange with Chris concerning his demeanor.
Now, my opinion is that the picture he's referring to is the one where Nichol asked him to prove that he was at Survey 319. And so I believe, in my opinion, that Nichol was still at the Watts residence, cleaning up anything to make sure nothing looked out of place, nothing looked like a struggle, or anything had happened, and getting every bit of evidence out of there that she could. And I believe also she was looking for Shanann's phone, which was later found in the couch.
His clothing, in fact, the only thing that seemed out of the ordinary, was the physical location of where Chris parked his truck that morning. But nothing that would have in any way revealed the clues to the crimes that this location would now bear. In retrospect, it's hard to imagine how or why Chris Watts ever thought he would get away with this. Over the years, many have speculated that limerence played a role in the irrationality of Chris's behavior. Limerence being a sort of infatuation that created a blind obsession that all but prevented Chris from having a rational view of his own actions. Truthfully, I have resigned the mental evaluation of Chris Watts to the professor professionals, because the more I learn about what he has admitted to doing to his wife and children that morning, the less I care about his reasons at 8:25 a.m. Chris would stage another call to Shannon's phone, and just 1 minute later, he would search for Primrose School at Vista Ridge. Primrose was the academy where his girls were supposed to be enjoying their first day of school. Instead, Watts would call the school and concoct a story about how the girls would no longer be attending, and before the staff could even formulate much of a response, Chris hung up the phone just after 9 a.m. And Shanann's phone sends out an appointment reminder. It was for a doctor's appointment that would become one of the early catalysts that would warn Shanann's friends and family that something had gone very wrong. Moments later, Chris would make another exceedingly odd phone call to his real estate agent, and Meadows 2 days later. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation aiding the Frederick Police Department would call Ann to speak with her after learning of her connection to Chris and Shanann. CBI agent Stacy Galleth spoke with Ann, who explained the strange conversation that she had with Chris on the morning of the 13th. Since the beginning and had almost exclusive dealt with Shanann during the overall process of buying and selling their home. In fact, to that point, she had only ever spoken with Chris twice ever. So the fact that Chris was calling her and asking if she had spoken with Shanann was not just odd. It was completely out of place.
I cannot stand when these AI voiceovers say Shanann's name wrong. It's so annoying. I know it is for you guys too, but...
Chris then proceeded to tell her that he and Shanann were getting a divorce, and that she was the very first person even before his own family to learn of this new and considerable life change. Less than an hour later, Centura Health would call Shanann's phone and leave a message after she failed to show up for her 9:15 appointment and at 10:10 a.m. Chris Watts opened Google and searched for the lyrics to the Metallica song Battery. We have since learned that Chris shared these exact same lyrics with Nichol Kessinger, who...
Actually, it was Nichol Kessinger that sent those lyrics to, or told Chris to listen to those lyrics.
Replied by asking him what the song meant to him. Between the pictures of volcanoes just hours earlier, the cold and apathetic mannerisms that Chris had been displaying toward Shanann, the lies surrounding his night with Nichol at the Lazy Dog, the affair that he intended on turning into a marriage, and even his own concurrent statements that he had been premeditating these crimes for weeks prior. It's beyond evident that Chris Watts' obsession with the woman and life that he would never have completely overshadowed whatever good may have existed in him before he chose to destroy his family over a complete mirage. 10:28 a.m. Sandra Rusek, Shannon's mother, worriedly texts Chris asking him, "Is Shannon okay?" The two would speak minutes later, where Chris would manufacture the first iteration of his story, claiming that Shanann was in one of her moods, that they had a small fight the night before, and that she was going to a friend's house at 10:33 immediately after lying to Shannon's mother. Chris is now searching for hotels in Aspen, Colorado. He even called the Westin Snowmass Resort in Aspen just 9 minutes later. And this is where I want to ask you, the audience, a question. Why do you think Chris was searching for a hotel getaway at this specific moment in time?
That is exactly the question that I was just thinking in my head. Why in the world would he be looking up for a hotel? For him to stay so he didn't have to go home and deal with news people or any of the Shanann's family or the police, maybe?
Now, we can all agree that Chris's behavior was not that of a man who anyone would qualify as being cogent. However, it would seem that his primary motivations during this period of time were solely based on the preservation of his relationship with Nichol Kessinger. And if you recall in Dylan Tolman's books, Chris was reported to have said that on the morning of August 13th, just hours before this hotel search and phone call, Nichol had allegedly told him to choose between her and his family, and that when he did choose her, she held him and promised that she would marry him and said that she would take care of everything for him. So again, I want to ask you the question. If Nichol Kessinger was truly oblivious to Chris's actions, as she will later claim, then why would Chris be making plans that included her, unless he believed that she would go moments later at 10:44 a.m.? Sandra Rusek calls Chris again. She would go on to call Chris one final time, as it was now becoming completely obvious that Chris was not going to help the ruse cheeks locate Shannon. That in fact he was likely the reason that Shannon wasn't answering her phone just after 12:16 p.m. And now every single one of Shannon's friends and family are becoming aware that Shannon and the girls are missing Chris, then receives a message from Josh Rosenberg. "Hey bro, Cassie asked me if I've heard from Shannon today. I guess she and Nikki can't get a hold of her. Have you heard from her at all today?" But while Josh, Cassie, and everyone were trying to find answers at this exact moment in time, Chris is preoccupied taking this picture of the surrounding landscape. Flowers, and more specifically sunflowers, had been a sign of Chris's devotion to Nichol Kessinger during the entirety of their relationship. In fact, just weeks before, we can see that on July 16th at 8:35 a.m., Chris took a picture of sunflowers near the Endarco corporate office one day. Later on the 17th of July, Chris again took pictures of flowers that he no doubt shared with Nichol, because that following day on the 18th, his relentless love bombing over the past several weeks appears to have worked eventually when law enforcement did search what little evidence remained on Nichole's cell phone. After she deleted virtually everything from it, they did find a considerable number of flower pictures in her phone, many of which were likely sent by Chris during the course of their affair. It's now just 1 minute later at 12:17, and Chris receives an alert on his Vivid Security phone app on his app. He can see Nichol Atkinson standing in front of his house trying to get inside in an attempt to locate Shannon and the girls. Chris knows that Nichol Atkinson will not find them there, so hoping to keep the situation at bay, he calls her and speaks with her for just under a minute. Watts had still not responded to Josh's text. So at 12:21 p.m., Chris finally sends a message back. "I just talked to Nikki. Sheenan went to a friend's house with the kids today. I haven't heard from her since. I will keep you updated." Though Josh would reply by telling Chris that they were worried. Chris responded the way that he always does. Cold, apathetic, a man who seems like he truly does not comprehend what empathy is or how to use it. At 12:27, Watts calls Nichol Atkinson back. He's now starting to realize that she's not going anywhere. It's around this time that Chris leaves work to head home, because Nichol Atkinson has made it clear that she's not backing down until she finds Shannon and the girls. Atkinson had already been deeply involved in trying to locate Shannon throughout that morning. As we know, she had picked up Shannon from the airport and dropped her off just hours earlier, right around 1:45 a.m.
Oh, Nichol Atkinson was a very good friend. I mean, that any woman would be lucky to have a friend like that. She stood by Shannon, and she still is so brokenhearted to this day.
Atkinson was already deeply aware of the problems that Chris and Shannon were having. She had also been a part of the ongoing conversation surrounding his strangely expensive meal at the Lazy Dog, and she knew of Shannon's despondency over the possibility that Chris was having an affair. But Nichol also knew that Shannon had an important doctor's appointment with Dr. Stephanie Traver that same morning at 9:15 a.m., an appointment that was made specifically for gender and genetic testing for her pregnancy. So when 9:15 came and went, and Shanann wasn't answering her text or calls, Nichol Atkinson stepped into action and went to the doctor's office with her son. When she arrived at Centura Health's office, she learned that Shanann was a no-show to her appointment. It was at that moment that she knew she needed to find Shanann. So she rushed over to the Watts residence and began looking into their house to see if she could find any signs of Shanann and the girls. But at that moment, Nichol Atkinson had no earthly idea just how important of a role that she was about to play in a crime that Chris Watts was already desperately trying to cover up at 12:27 p.m. Chris is in the midst of his own self-inflicted chaos when he receives a message from his realtor in Meadows. She says, "Hi, I'm working on your market analysis. I would like to bring my listing coordinator with me when I bring it to your house. Did you finish the basement? Are there any other upgrades to the house?" A few minutes later, at 12:31, Addie M. messed Chris asking if Shanann was okay. Everyone is worried it's not like her to not respond, and we haven't heard back from her all day. Chris would initially ignore this message, but by this point in time, it's obvious that he has completely underestimated Shanann's friends and family, let alone the lengths they were about to go to force Chris to be accountable for everything he had just destroyed 10 minutes later. And Chris is back on the phone with Nichol Atkinson while rushing home. But just 2 minutes later, after their 40-second phone call, Shannon's friend Cassie stages the first significant confrontation of Chris in her valiant attempt to get answers. Cassie messages Chris at 12:43 p.m. "Shanann is in a very bad way emotionally, and I'm worried about her. I know you're having issues, but I don't know to what extent how. However, I do know that I have never seen her so broken to an extent that I am worried." Chris responded, "She went to a friend's house with the kids, but she won't tell me where. Though when I get home, I will update you a few minutes later." Cassie messages again, "Sweetie, nobody knows about you or her, other than Nichol Atkinson and I. So where would she go if not with Nikki, or not to Arizona? Where I'm at, her car and shoes and everything is at the house. What the heck is going on with you guys that she would totally shut out everything? It's not like her, Chris." Now I believe that what Chris is about to say in response to that message is one of the most important views into his psychological makeup and the way that he views himself in the world. Listen closely. "I told Nikki about what was happening so she wouldn't freak out anymore. I think Christina knows as well. Shannon and I talked last night and I told her, I want to sell the house and get something smaller. Separation would be best right now if we can't work through our issues." Now essentially, Chris is saying that in response to Nichol Atkinson showing up to his house, that he told her that him and Shanann were having problems and that she left to a friend's house. He poorly conjures these god-awful lies that no reasonable person would ever believe, leave seemingly as a means to buy time. And while he's racing back to his house in an effort to stifle Nichol Atkinson's determined attempts at gaining entry into his home, Chris ends that text message by saying this, "I really don't want you to think that I'm a bad person." Cassie, this is a sentiment that Chris Watts continues to hold to this very day. In fact, in Dylan Tolman's book, he even reflects on this very same issue. Chris and Tolman are having a discussion about how they are viewed by the public. Chris says, "I wish people would judge me on my whole past. Instead, they only judge me on that one day." And to those who question the veracity of Tolman's books, it seems to me that this is exactly something that Chris would say, because he lives under the delusion that his previous life as a parent and as a husband somehow absolves him of the horrific things he had done. Just hours before sending this text message, Chris seems more concerned about how he's perceived than taking any form of responsibility for his actions. And that's precisely why Chris Watts has sprinted towards an entirely new obsession with religion, because he cannot handle the fact that he is objectively a bad person. But it's this next comment by Cassie that is the literal definition of catharsis, because right after Chris sent his pathetic attempt at looking for validation, mere hours after what he had just done, Cassie has had enough right now, Chris. I don't care about you. I don't care about your relationship or what type of person you are or are not. And I don't even care what I think of you. And I'm not trying to be rude when I say that. And right after Cassie says exactly what all of us are thinking, Chris continues to demonstrate the apparent actions of an unbothered sociopath because while he's racing back home, he makes sure to take the time to respond to his real estate agent's previous questions, telling her the basement is still unfinished. No other upgrades by 1:03 p.m. Cassie is done messing around. She rightfully chastises Chris, telling him that her only concern is for his wife and for her well-being. She tells Chris that Nikki is calling the police saying that Shanann is broken emotionally. She explains to him that Shannon's blood sugar dropped due to not eating and it could easily cause her to pass out. So unless he wanted the police to bust down his door, he better get home and check on his family 2 minutes later at 1:05 p.m. Chris responds, "I'm going home." "Cassie, I'm on my way. Don't call the police. I will be there in 45 minutes. It's hard to imagine what would have happened if Shanann's friends were not as involved in her life as they were, if Chris had been given the opportunity to spin his lies."
Someone sent me a comment and said that they found a video, or they had seen a video of Nichol, a picture of Nichol hiding in the basement, and they said they don't know how the cops missed it. If any of you guys know where I can find that video, I would really appreciate it if you could tell me. If anybody's seen it, please give me the link to the video or tell me what channel it's on.
Uninterrupted for just one more day, just after 1:13 p.m. And Troy McCoy texts Chris asking if everything was okay, telling him if you need anything. Let me know 1 minute later. And Chris is still answering random, completely unimportant questions to his real estate agent at 1:31 p.m. Nicole Atkinson calls Chris again, trying to ascertain where he is. He tells her that he's still en route and he will be there shortly, but Nicole Atkinson refuses to wait even 1 minute longer. So she calls the Frederick Police Department and eventually speaks with Detective Dave Bombover. During the call, she conveys the urgency of the situation, that Shanann was not only pregnant, but that she was also diagnosed with lupus and diabetes. Atkinson would explain that after she left Shanann's doctor's office, she arrived at the Watts residence and tried to gate entry into their home. However, the front security door inter-aisle latch was locked and prevented her from accessing the house. It was then that Atkinson's son looked in the garage window and noticed that Shanann's vehicle, along with the girls' car seats, were still inside. Just after 1:40 p.m., Officer Crod responded to Nicole Atkinson's request for a well check. This body cam footage begins when Officer Crod arrives to the Watts family home. Upon arriving, both the officer and Atkinson attempt to see if they can gain entry into the house or to locate Shanann and the girls. Approximately 15 minutes later, Chris Watts arrives. And this is the first time we get to see just how suspicious his behavior was from the moment he stepped out of his vehicle. Eventually, Chris is interviewed by Detective Bombover, who arrives at the scene. A short time later, Chris will concoct his first set of lies to law enforcement, claiming that her disappearance was only because he and Shanann were having marital problems. He told Detective Bombover that he woke up at 4 a.m. and left for work at 5:27. However, like most things with Chris Watts, none of that was true. Chris claimed that both he and Shanann were in tears that morning. However, they did not argue, and that Shanann had told him that she was going to take the girls to a friend's house later that day. Throughout the entirety of this body cam footage, the only thing we know at this point in time with certainty is that Chris was capable of committing a crime, the details of which most people could not begin to fathom, and just hours later, he is completely calm, cool, and collected. It's why so many of people have made the assertion of psychopathy when analyzing his behavior in body language, because regardless of what Watts or his family has to say, he appears completely unbothered.
That is the definition of a sociopath. Complete sociopath.
However, that was about to change when law enforcement learned that Chris's neighbor Nate had evidence that proved that Chris was the only person who was seen leaving the Watts residence that entire day. Watching this footage of Chris Watts standing there, hands above his head, clearly panicked and barely able to breathe or maintain his composure, is one of the few moments that we actually get to see Chris squirm, because it's this footage that not only confirmed what law enforcement would go on to use to prove their case against him, it would also become the cornerstone of the allegations against Nichol Kessinger. And before we're done with this series, it's my hope that you will understand exactly why. By 2:10 p.m., Chris's is now receiving messages from many of the friends of Shanann. Christina Meum texts, "Chris, what's going on? Where are you? We are so worried." 1 minute later, Chris staged another fake text to Shanann sending, "Where are you?" just after 2:11 p.m. Around that same time, Shannon's friends, Cassie Christina, Nicole Atkinson, and Addie, all began a group text sharing their growing concern over Shannon's well-being. 2:26 p.m. Chris responds to Christina Meum, "The police are here. I'll call you when I know." Shortly after 3:46 that afternoon, law enforcement finished their first interview with Chris Watts, and it's clear to them that nothing is adding up. They would find Shannon's phone, her purse, her car, her medications. Everything is still in their house, along with the girls' car seats and everything else that Shanann would have brought if she had ever left the house that day. At that time, Addie messages Chris to inquire what's happening, conveying her concern over the worsening situation. Shortly thereafter, the two would speak on the phone for just over 6 minutes, but as soon as Addie got off the phone with Chris, she sent a group message to all of Shannon's concerned friends. The police need to look at Chris's cell phone and his computer. The discovery records tell us a tale of the pain that everyone endured because of Chris's selfishness. That day, it is still hard to fathom what he did, let alone why. But one thing was clear throughout every page of these records. Sheenan Catherine Rusek was loved by everyone and anyone who knew her. It's 4:22 p.m., and Kelly Burke inquires what law enforcement is saying about the search. For Shanann, Chris let her know that a missing persons report would be filed the following morning, if Shanann hadn't turned up by then a few minutes later. Burke asked Chris if Shanann was awake when he left for work that morning. Chris continues the lies by saying, "I only talked to her early this morning between 4 and 5 a.m. I think she went back to sleep afterwards. She was still there when I left, kids still sleeping." Burke responded to Chris telling him that she's scared, and this time Chris would actually tell the truth. He told her that he was too. But Chris's fear was for an entirely different reason at 5:01 p.m. Nichol Kessinger attempts to call Chris twice. Unfortunately, he doesn't answer either. Call Nicole will go on to tell law enforcement that Chris had texted her earlier, mentioning in passing that his family was gone and asked her to call when she could. But Nicole will also claim at the exact same time that for the entirety of this day, she was not concerned at all about what Chris told her surrounding the events of Shanann and the girls disappearing that day. Nicole will claim that she just assumed that Shanann took the girls to a friend's house and that there was nothing to be concerned about by the evening of August 13th. Every one of Shannon's friends and family were in a complete and justifiable panic. They would eventually suggest to Chris that he should call all of the local hospitals in the area to make sure that she wasn't admitted for a health-rated emergency at 6 p.m. Chris would call 4 different hospitals in the area, including Good Samaritan Medical Center in Lade St. Anthony's North Health Campus, Longmont United Hospital, and UC Health in Broomfield. And Chris made these calls to check to see if Shanann and the girls was at any one of them in just 4 minutes in Detective P's discovery report. He realized that Chris could not have made all 4 of those calls in such a short amount of time, so he got on the phone and called each hospital, asking for a completely fabricated person to gauge the amount of time that it would have taken for Chris to receive a response resp, and it came to no one's surprise that it took 2 minutes just to get an answer from one of the hospitals, let alone all 4. But by 6:23 p.m., Kelly Burke asked Chris if he had any luck in his attempts to locate Shanann at any one of those local hospitals. All he said back was no luck at all. More lies at 6:30 p.m. when Realtor and Meadows asks if Shanann was okay. Making note of the fact that she had been absent from their group chat discussion that whole day, Chris responded saying she hasn't been around all day. It's very odd at 6:52 p.m. Chris messages Samantha Pasley telling her, "I'm praying so hard I'm sick to my stomach. Cops searched the house up and down and drilled me pretty hard. I have no idea where Shanann and the girls could be." A little more than an hour later, Chris responds to Samantha. One final time, law enforcement was just being thorough. They got to do all the digging they can. I saw the girls this morning. And yeah, people are helping me search. You don't need to get on a plane, though. We have a lot of support here. This is it. This is why millions of people all across the world completely abhor Chris Watts and the things he did that day. Because he could have chosen so many other paths. He could have just left Shanann and got a divorce. And I do not want to hear from anyone attempting to victim blame that Shanann was mean to him. Because what he did to his wife and children had nothing to do with the flaws in her. They had everything to do with the flaws in him. And he proved that with every one of these messages to her friends, her family, and even to her own parents, because he willfully fed them false hope. knowing full well the grave site he left behind at Survey 319, and to this day there's no signs of contrition, no heartfelt apology, there's zero humility. And the evidence that Chris Watts was absent of any meaningful contrition for his actions was about to be put on full display the evening of August 13th when he would get on the phone with Nichol Kessinger. Just after 9:48 on August 13th, the day of the crime, Chris Watts called Nichol Kessinger, and the two would initially speak for about 50 minutes. 30 minutes later, Nichol would call Chris this time, and they would speak for 52 minutes later that night from 12:08 to 2:18 a.m. The two would speak off and on for an additional 54 minutes, and to those counting, that would mean that from 9:48 p.m. until 2:18 a.m., a span of just about 6 hours, Chris and Nichol spoke for a combined total of 2 hours and 36 minutes. And just wait till you hear what Nichol Kessinger says when she's asked to recall their discussion that evening on Monday night. So a couple things. I told you, he had texted me, and then at the end of the night he had called, or I called, I think he called me, but either way, we were on the phone with each other, and at some point when we were on the phone, he was like, do you want to FaceTime? And I remember I was laying in bed, and I was just like, you know what? Okay, let me turn on the light. And I remember I turned on the light, and we FaceTime. And when we FaceTimed, he didn't really say much, it was almost kind of awkward. I don't even know why I didn't think of this earlier, but it was very short too. It was super brief. And what is short? Like a couple of minutes or 30 minutes? Oh, no, I bet it was only probably less than 5 minutes. I think it was only a couple of minutes. Okay, now, without context, listening to Nichole's inner interviews with Detective Kobach can be so deceptively benign if you didn't know the details surrounding that evening and everything leading up to it. If all you heard was her talking about her conversations with Chris that night, I could understand why many people made the wrong first impression and assumed that she was not involved. But as they say, the devil's in the details. So, let's keep listening. I think we were talking a little bit, but he was laying down on a mattress that didn't have any sheets on it, and I was like, okay. So I was thinking well, maybe he's in bed. I don't know what's up, but I remember asking him where's your sheet? And he's like, oh, I washed them. And then this is the part. I don't remember if this sentence right here came in the space home conversation or if it came in a phone conversation, prior FaceTime conversation. But regardless, this next sentence came on Monday night, and I'm so sorry that I cannot always remember chronological, every little detail. That's okay. It's understandable. There's so much. But I remember he was saying that he was cleaning the house to try to keep busy, to take his mind off of things. And this was on the phone. So far, Nichol has successfully deflected Kevin Kobach's questioning by insinuating something sinister surrounding Chris's laying on his bed without his bedsheets. She knows that it implies that he was up to no good. But she also knows that she spoke with Chris for nearly 3 hours. And there's something else she's hiding about the morning of the 14th that she's praying Detective Kobach won't bring up. I didn't honestly think that much about it originally, because that man is always cleaning. He's a very, very, organized, meticulous, clean individual. He's the type of guy that will, vacuum his whole house one week, and if there's rooms that don't get used, he'd vacuum again the next week, just because it's, part of his routine. Okay? So the fact that he's, cleaning to kill time and take his mind off things did not seem like a super red flag to me every time that Nichol Kessinger is trying to deflect time that she is attempting to subvert the truth. She accomplishes this very much like a magician. In one hand, she provides you with the distracting story that very likely has elements of the truth, while at the same time using the other hand to hide whatever it is she doesn't want law enforcement to see. Nichole's comments about Chris doing laundry and the bedsheets sounds incredibly contrived, because again, she's still hoping that Kevin Kobach will not find the one thing that she cannot explain. And I'm not sure if you've noticed yet, but she has still yet to describe what they've talked about in any demonstrable detail. So anyways, that didn't seem out like the norm for me, but something that just kind of dawned on me last night as he made the comment directly after that. He said I had to watch the kids' sheet. He was like, they smelled, and I was thinking about that last night, and I'm like, this man keeps that house so clean. This the cleanest house I've ever seen, and I'm like, this man keeps that house so clean. Why would his kids' sheets smell bad? And this, you think this was Monday night. What time do you think it was? Monday night. Oh God, I don't even know. I almost wish you guys would show me my phone number. I'm going to read off your phone calls for Monday and Tuesday starting. No, it's on Monday. Just me. Monday night. Monday night. You guys had we talked about a phone call yesterday, but you guys had a phone call. Monday night, it looks like he called you. It was 48 minutes and 57 seconds. It was at 9:48 p.m. that he called you. So that would take us to about 10:35. And then there's another call on Monday. It's for 51 minutes and 25 seconds. It looks like, I'm not sure looking at this who called who, but it looks like you called him. And that was at 11:09 p.m. That lasted 51 minutes. So that takes us to midnight. And then there's another phone call where he calls you. So we're now into midnight, you know? Tuesday morning, it's a 30-minute phone call. That lasts until 12:38 a.m. And then, after 12:38 a.m., there's a 2-minute and 44-second phone call that lasts that starts at 1:12 a.m. It's 2 minutes and 44 seconds. These are the words of a seasoned professional of deception and deceit.
She never even said what they talked about. She says she cannot really remember what they talked about, just random things. And Chris Watts still says he doesn't remember what they talked about either. They said something about having phone sex, and that was about it. But that's a long time to have that. So I believe they were talking about, oh my gosh, I didn't think this was going to all happen, and how are we going to cover this up? And how are you going to keep me out of trouble, Chris?
Nicole knows exactly what she said during those phone calls with Chris. We know she does because she will later provide law enforcement with a detailed, exhaustive timeline of the entirety of her relationship with Chris, providing painfully accurate details about events that had occurred weeks and months earlier. But the phone calls Nicole and Detective Kobach are discussing right now just happened 4 days prior. And the reason why this moment matters so much is because of what was happening at 2:07 a.m., the morning of August 14th. Now I want you to listen to Nicole's answer clearly and without interruption. It's long, but it's important because this is the one and only time that Nichol provides a reconciliation of those conversations. And remember what you're about to hear. Satisfied law enforcement, CBI, the FBI, and DA Michael Rohr, as a sufficient answer concerning what they discussed for 156 minutes, less than 24 hours after Chris Watts committed his crimes. So I would almost, this is just me, but I would go get my text messages with him from that night. And I would think them up to that time frame because there was texting in between that. So I think what happened is he called me on that first call, and then there's that gap between the first call and the second call. In that gap, that was when I FaceTime for a few minutes, and that was when I got up out of bed because I was just having trouble sleeping, and I was I went and did laundry. That's what I did. I went I just put some clothes in the dryer, and then I think I called him back, and then we continued to talk. So that little gap right there between those two big phone calls at the very beginning of the night, not the very beginning of the night, but the big ones, the first two. So in between that gap, there's a quick FaceTime. So you think that 2 minute and 44 second is the FaceTime, the one at the very end. Yeah, well, so I don't even think the FaceTime's on there. The FaceTime occurred in between those two big phone calls okay, because it was one big phone call, and then there's a FaceTime, and in the FaceTime short, it's only a few minutes, and then there's probably just a few more minutes. There's a few more calls on Tuesday. So 1:12 is the 2 minute and 44 second call. That lasts till approximately 1:15, and then there's a long gap until 1:50. So another 45 or 35 minutes, and then there's a 7-minute phone call. That phone call lasts till 1:58 a.m., and then there's a 10-second phone call at 27 a.m., followed by, I think he calls you and maybe leaves a voicemail or something, or you don't pick up. So there's a 10-second call, and then directly after that, there's a 10-minute and 24-second phone call. Okay, so I'm talking about the two at the very beginning and the two long ones. And is that when he's talking about the kid? She. Okay, so yes. I will help you line this up. Like I almost want to just come in there and like drop and drag all of my text to where they were going, you know, what we may meet and do that. Here coming early next week. Did you hear what just happened? Nichol was asked several times about her discussions with Chris during their nearly 3-hour-long phone call, and instead of answering the question, she offers to come down there and help fill in the gap. And guess what? That never happened.
Nope, sure didn't. And we still don't know what they were talking about. But I have an idea, and I know you all have your opinions too, and they line up. And I don't think all of us are stupid, so I think Nichol Kessinger's straight busted, and she's gonna go down eventually. It's gonna take a new team that's not gonna take orders from the people that were protecting her, but it's gonna happen.
But something very important did happen just before 2 a.m. that night of the 14th, while Nichol was speaking with Chris during the call that began at 1:51 a.m. Minutes later at 1:58, Chris began receiving a number of phone calls from the Frederick Police Department. So Chris and Nichol got off the phone, and at 2:05 a.m., Chris returned Officer Goodman's phone call from his work cell phone. But mere seconds later, Nichol Kessinger called Chris's cell phone and stayed on the call while Chris was being interviewed by Officer Goodman in the interview we have been listening to between Nichol Kessinger and CBI agent Kevin Kobach took place on the 17th of August, less than 4 days after Nicole eavesdropped on Chris's discussion with law enforcement, and it just happens to be the exact same phone call that would become the very last time that Nichol and Chris would speak again. But I have a question. Why would Nichol want to know what law enforcement was saying? If she was not involved in this crime in any way, then why would Chris have her on the other line listening in? Remember, Nichol would claim in her first in-person interview that she didn't even suspect Chris of anything until the following day. So knowing what you now know, listen to the very next thing Nichol Kessinger said as Detective Kobach began to press her about these calls. Yeah, well, all those phone calls at the very end of the night, that was me freaking out. Like, if you look at my text, a lot of that was like, I can't sleep. I'm really scared. Where's your family? That was like me freaking out and him calling to like try to assure me, or me calling him like, please talk to me. I'm super scared. Where's your family? Like those little ones at the very end of the night are me not being able to sleep and trying to get him to like talk to me about like, and just, I guess, making sure everything was okay.
Why in the world would she have any reason to be scared? If she had no idea about the crime, if she had just thought that Shanann was away with the girls, wouldn't she be happy that Shanann had taken off with the girls and might be leaving Chris? She should be happy. She shouldn't be scared. She should be happy that Shanann's not coming home, because that means the separation might be actually happening.
So that those like real L ones, and that's why they're all kind of like sporadic CU. I'd be up for like an hour, and then I'd fall asleep for like 15 minutes, and then I would like wake up and start stressing again and try to call him back. So that's why they're all these like little sporadic ones throughout the end of the night. But those two big ones is, so yesterday we talked about Tuesday was mainly text messages regarding your confrontation about his wife being pregnant. Doesn't all of this start to make a lot more sense now? Because again, if Nichol Kessinger isn't involved, then what would she have to be so scared of? Why is she unable to sleep? Why is she asking Chris to calm her down if she wasn't involved? Then what is she so panicked about? But it's probably not a surprise by now, because immediately after Nichol implicates herself by virtue of her reaction alone, Detective Kobach responds by completely changing the subject. Nichol Kessinger had spent the last 2 months gallivanting around with a man who she knew was married. She never once showed any concern over Shannon's well-being before. In fact, she outright refused to even say her name. But even more importantly than all of that combined is if Nichol was not involved, then she had no reason to suspect that anything had happened to Shannon or the girls during these initial calls. Because I would like to remind you that 24 hours before this conversation took place, Nichol conducted her first in-office interview, and previously said this did that. So the death strike you as odd, but you're thinking maybe she just left. I just thought she needed to like get away from the situation. I mean, that didn't seem that awkward to me. That a couple that is going through separation would be like, I need to leave. I just need some space. Like, it didn't even like process. I was like, okay, like, give her some space. I really thought she left. I was like, let her go.
Then why are you so terrified? Why do you keep saying you can't sleep? Why do you keep calling Chris about worrying about his family? Why are you worried about Shanann so much if you just said leave her alone, let her have some time, let her have some space? She is contradicting herself at every step of the way. She's so guilty, you guys, and I know you know it too.
You know, she'll come back in a day. She'll be all right. Let her cool down. She'll be here. It'll be okay. You know, like, have me convinced, like, I think she's just upset. And it's here that I want to contrast what we've learned against the backdrop of Dylan Tolman's books, after taking the time to read them. There are a few important things that I've learned. Many of you have a healthy dose of suspicion anytime new claims arise from Watts Island, and it's for that reason that I have evaluated Tolman's claims, by trying to ascertain if there is any uniformity to the way that he describes Chris Watts. Much of what he conveys is identical to how we know Chris communicates the way that he speaks through coded religious idioms, and more importantly, the univocal narrative that he provides, which is synonymous with what we already know of Chris Watts in Tolman's second book. He writes about a discussion that he had with Chris concerning the morning of August 13th. He states on the morning of August 13th, I was going to check in with Nichol because we had plans to meet up before work. My plan was to skip work and spend the day with her until all of this transpired. I immediately thought of Nichol, and I thought perhaps we could start over somewhere in North Carolina. But losing my wife made me feel doomed alone, especially the thought of losing my mistress too. So I met up with Nichol where we were supposed to rendezvous on the way to work. She was so calm about the whole situation, she told me to just go to work like I was supposed to. And she asked me about the girls. We talked it over for a while, and we decided that we could make it look like they went missing now. If this account is to be believed, it would mean that on the morning of August 13th, Chris not only met with Nichol, but that she helped encourage and direct him on how to cover it up. Tolman's next segment goes on to say when Chris was asked what they decided to do with Shanann, after he had already committed his crimes against her, Nichol responded by saying that she would take care of it later on. Tolman confronts Chris and asks him if he had any help in the commission of the crimes against the girls. Chris responds by saying, "Yes, I did." Tolman asks him, "Did Jezebel help you?" Chris sighed, and eventually he responded, "Yes, over the last 6 years. So many of us have quietly watched and listened to the countless documentaries and iterations of this case every single time. We are reminded of these moments. We grieve with her family, knowing the unimaginably heavy price they continue to pay for a crime that should just never have happened. This retrospective is our way of continuing to advocate for justice for the people who matter most, in this case Shanann, Bella, Cece, and Nico. But we also want to remember all of the victims of violent crime that happens all over the world.
All right, guys, so that's the end. I hope you guys got something from this video. I wanted to show you guys this. I've been looking for it for a while. It does have a lot of views, so some of you may have seen it, but it's important. And that clip of Nichol, I believe it's Nichol, walking out and getting caught on Nate's camera. I don't even think Chris knew that Nate had a camera, because he seemed pretty shocked when he found out that he was seen backing his truck into the driveway. So we'll see you in the next one, guys. I'm going to keep on digging. But if you can find of that video or wherever this picture is of Nichol hiding in a basement, please let me know. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.